And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you that if you have to make a decision about something, what factors would you bring into consideration? You might have the information in front of you, but all these other things which you bring in order to examine your decision are what we call the factors, and the exercise is one we'll call consider all the factors. And for shorthand, we call that CAF, just so when we use these lessons in school, you can just refer to it. You can say, do a CAF on something. Now, that's one exercise. The other exercise is when we make a decision, then certain consequences happen. The immediate future, short-term future, long-term future. So here we're looking at the consequences of our decision. Now, there's quite a close similarity between the consider all factor and the consequences, because really consequences are those factors which are going to happen in the future as a result of your taking action. This one we call C and S. The S actually stands for sequel, or sequelae, but you can just think of it as C and S. What I'm going to do is ask one half of the room to do the C and S exercise, the other half to do the CAF exercise, on the same problem which I'm going to give you. And the problem is this. You live in town, let's say, and you are considering giving up your car. Maybe because of parking, maybe because petrol is too expensive, whatever the reason. You're just discussing with your family or other people the possibility of giving up your car, making a decision to give up your car. Now, on one side, I want you to consider all the factors you need to think of, and on the other, what you might think the consequences of that decision. When you're doing the consequences, there are the immediate consequences, which is up to 1 year. There's the short term, and there's the long term, which is over 5 years. So in your groups now, and that's 5 years plus, in your groups this side of the room, you consider the factors you'd have to take into account in making that decision. This side, just look at the consequences of what would happen if you did give up your car. All right? In your groups, as you were before, all right, let's see what we've got. Let's get a little bit of feedback from each group quite crisply. Group here to begin with.
What other public transport there is?
Yes, what other public transport there is?
How to get rid of your car.
How to get rid of your car. Yes, okay, fair enough. Back there.
Costs overall of the exercise.
Costs overall of the exercise, your savings, what else you might spend, and so on. Okay, another one from the back group.
The alternative.
Yes, the alternative, either bicycle, motorcycle, public transport, alternatives available, yes. Also alternatives available from where you actually live. It may not be a bus stop nearby. All right, some of the consequences this side, wasn't it? Yes?
You have to move to get closer to your
yes,
work.
Good point, very good. You might have to move to get closer to your work or closer to transport. Very good point.
It would have you to meet a lot more different friends if you had to...
Very good, excellent. If you had to take buses and trains, you might make more friends, meet more people. Very nice.
Possibly you'd be better in health for walking.
Yes, might have been that. Okay, so when we're doing these, what we're really saying is, let's put some focus, let's look in this direction and see what we see as factors, or let's look in this direction and see what we see in consequences, in order to have a broader view of whatever we're going to decide or think about. So we've looked at how we get the best out of information with logic, with what I call dense reading, with a broader scan. Now we come to how we get more information. In other words, how we get more. And one of the ways, of course, is asking questions. Now, there's two sorts of questions. One is what I call a shooting question. And I call it a shooting question because when you shoot something, you shoot a gun or whatever it is, you know what you're shooting at. That's supposed to be a bird. You know what you're shooting at. A fishing question is rather different. A fishing question, you sit on the edge of the bank and you put your hook down with a worm on, and you really don't know what's going to turn up. That's supposed to be a fish. So supposing I said to you, where did you go last night? That's a fishing question. You might have gone anywhere. On the other hand, if I said to you, were you at home last night? That's a shooting question, because you would say, yes, I was, or no, I wasn't. Another way we proceed, instead of asking questions, is to do experiments. and we try out an experiment, and if it works, we get a lot of information. Well, we're going to do a little game now, which is a sort of experiment game, but the sort of experiment which we can do in a studio, unlike many experiments. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a shape up here, and now that shape has certain characteristics. And I'm going to ask Dinah to ask someone to come up who's going to draw another shape. If that shape has the same characteristics as mine, I will give it a tick, which means the experiment works. If it does not, I will give it a cross. And then we've all got to try and see how quickly we get to that point. All right? So you draw a shape there, and in order... There's one characteristic I have in mind, yes. And I will tick it if your experiment works, and I will give it a cross if it doesn't work. Okay, and the answer is your experiment. Stay here, I'll stay here, do some more. The answer is your experiment works. Carry on.
Another characteristic.
You've got to narrow it down until you know exactly what it is I've got in mind.
Can I draw what I think might be the characteristic itself?
You can. No, that's wrong. You're wrong. You carry out another experiment. These are all experiments, as it were, and if they work in this way. Okay, the answer is that also works. Try one more.
Trying to get a straight-sided figure other than the other ones I've used. Is that the right idea?
No, just keep going, keep going, keep going.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's supposed to be a straight line. There.
Okay,
I forget that one.
all right. Okay, that works. And now, if you sit down, I'll just tell you the point. All these experiments work except that. That was a guess towards the end. Is it this? These are all experiments. They work. Now, I'll tell you what sometimes happens with this thing. And it's rather interesting that all that's happened there. I draw that, and then someone might draw that, and then they might draw that, and then they might draw that, and then they might draw maybe something like that. All of these are right. Now, you can go on for a very long time, and they would all be right. Now, one time I was doing it, and the first thing which someone drew was the following. He drew a completely unrecognizable shape. The purpose being that if that was right, it really makes all these unnecessary, because the actual shape is unnecessary. And what it ends up with, it's actually anything with two crossing lines in it. But it's an interesting example of how big a jump one takes with a question or an experiment. And the whole purpose of science really is to be able to take big jumps in your information. I'm not saying that's the only strategy to use. Sometimes that is the best strategy. Just slight changes, slight changes, slight changes until you notice a difference. So let's move on to something else which is very important, which is this.